Well, before we get started, just a little bit about Pew. We are a independent, nonpartisan, non-governmental organization dedicated to serving the public's interests. You probably have heard of the Pew Research Center. Most people know us by a lot of the polling and public opinion work that we do. We also support arts and culture in Philadelphia, our hometown. And, of course, we work in public policy, in health, in state governance, in the environment, in energy, of course, and consumer protection, and so on. So it's great to have you here. I direct the Clean Energy Initiative for the Pew Charitable Trust, and we are dedicated to accelerating the adoption of clean energy technologies that are, we believe, in the country's interest. And we strongly believe from all of our research of global clean energy deployment trends and our own clean energy business network and other experts that we really need long-term, consistent clean energy policies to help create jobs and businesses, spur innovation and manufacturing, reduce carbon pollution, and, of course, enhance our national security. So, and this current kind of boom and bust nature of U.S. clean energy policies makes it really difficult to break down those long-standing market barriers to renewable and energy-efficient technologies. You know, we'd like to ensure that greater competition for consumers, encourage diversity in our energy mix, and then, of course, develop those supply chains that we need. But uncertainty really shakes not only, the industry, but also the confidence of potential investors, and it keeps capital on the sidelines. So it's kind of been a difficult time. But, despite all these barriers, the clean energy sector has made incredible strides over the past decade, right? In terms of cost reductions, installations, innovations, it's really been remarkable. But still, we strongly believe that policy is needed, and, tax policy has been energy policy of late, of course. And so with the possibility of a tax extenders package being taken up in the lame duck session, we thought this would be a good time to have a conversation. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today with our experts, with Senator Warner and, of course, Senator Carper, who's come on his way here. So as you all know, the Expire Act, which was introduced in May, a scant, 1 month after Senator Wyden assumed the chairmanship of the Finance Committee, would extend the production tax credit for wind as well as other electricity-producing sources like biomass, geothermal through 2015. Other incentives under the Act would include tax credit for new qualified fuel cell motor vehicles, for alternative fuel vehicle refueling property, incentives for certain biofuels production and biodiesel feedstocks, as well as energy efficiency incentives for commercial buildings and new homes. And in addition to the provisions in those bills, some advocates, I'm sure many of you in the room, and certainly we at the Pew Charitable Trust, are seeking the inclusion of additional incentives or changes to the existing tax code. So a little bit about our program today. We're very fortunate to be joined by Senator Carper, who from his perch is going to talk to on finance, is going to talk to us about the Expire Act and kind of what he thinks is going to happen. The certain provisions that, of course, clean energy provisions that he has championed or authored, and then, of course, a look to the future. And he has agreed to take a few questions from the audience here in the room and the more than 200 folks that are signing on remotely. So we're going to manage that. But he is term limited, so he'll take just a few questions before he leaves. And for those of you who do want to ask a question, we're going to have Carrie and Jessica, who are going to, you just raise your hand, they'll come to you and hand you a microphone, and if you could stand up and tell us your name and state your question, and we're going to try and get to as many of those as we can. After Senator Carper, we're going to hear from our panelists and a very esteemed group. We're thrilled that they'll be here with us today, and they represent different sectors of the clean energy economy, and they're going to discuss those energy provisions in the Expire Act that they would like to see move forward or be amended or extended. And then we're going to have time for Q&A with those panelists as well, again, from folks here in the room and from folks who are participating remotely. So if you are listening remotely, go ahead and use that chat mechanism as soon as you hear something you want to ask about, and we'll take a look and get those asked. Then to wrap up, we have the great good fortune of being joined by Senator John Warner, who is a senior Pew Fellow and is also a senior advisor to the Pew Project on National Security, Energy, and Climate. And there aren't very many people in this city today that are a statesman, I believe, of his caliber, with his wisdom, wealth of experience, and dedicated public service. So we're very fortunate, as always, to have him. I'm not sure if we have Senator Carper coming up on the elevator. He's 5 minutes away. Okay, so why don't we do this? Why don't we kind of juggle things a bit, and if we could ask our panelists to come up, and we'll start with a few questions for them. So we are extraordinarily lucky to be joined today by 4 experts. Jim Riley is the Senior Vice President for Federal Legislative Affairs for the American Wind Energy Association, and he oversees lobbying on Capitol Hill, grassroots activism, and the association's Political Action Committee. Riley most recently was Chief of Staff to Senator Carper, so he's going to get an opportunity to visit with his old boss for a few minutes here today. Kathy Weiss is Vice President of Federal Government Affairs at First Solar and is responsible for managing the company's interest before Congress and with the administration. She also serves on various trade and business associations, including the Solar Energy Industry Association, SEIA, and the Business Council for Sustainable Energy Board of Directors. Jen Durstein is the Director of Policy and Strategy and Distributor Development at Capstone Turbine Corporation, and in that role she drives advocacy on policy and regulatory measures at the local, at the state, at the federal, and at the global level, and encourages deployment of clean, efficient microturbines, as well as heading up the strategic market analysis and distributor training and development. That's a mouthful. Scott Thigpen is a senior associate with Booz Allen Hamilton on engagement across the entire Department of Defense portfolio. This work focuses on identifying and executing large-scale renewable and demand reduction projects in response to federal mandates and changing market dynamics. And so we'll learn from him how the DoD is doing on their 3-gigawatt goal. But anyway, I thought we'd take a few minutes. If each of you, we can start with Jen, would kind of describe a little bit about what your company does, if folks are not acquainted with it, and kind of what you have at stake in the Extenders Act, or what you'd like to see in the Extenders.
Sure, and I'll just mention I also serve as the chair of the CHP Association's Policy Committee. So Capstone Turbine Corporation, we are a manufacturer of microturbines. We manufacture them here in the United States. A microturbine is not a small wind turbine. It's a small gas turbine. And we use them to support customers' needs for on-site power in a number of market segments. What's at stake for us today? The CHP investment tax credit doesn't expire until the end of 2016, but there are a number of changes that we think would be helpful to help us deploy this clean, energy-efficient technology. And also on the waste heat to power side, which has sort of a mistaken maybe absentism from the tax code, the investment tax credit right now.
Okay. Jim?
Great. The American Wind Energy Association has actually been around for over 40 years, and we represent those that build wind equipment, those that put it up, those that keep it working, and those that use and buy the electrons to send to the grid. So it's an organization with over 1,100 members, and we look at things like safety, we look at things like regulation and siting and how we can help our members make the most of their investments in wind. And obviously we spend a lot of time working on federal policies, both on Capitol Hill and in the administration, as well as in the states. There's a lot happening at the state level, which I know we may not talk about today. There is an incredible amount at stake for the wind industry in the tax provisions. The production tax credit, which we can talk about a little bit later, has been critical in bringing wind forward to the state it is today. It needs to continue so that we can really maximize the value that wind brings. So we are focused on bringing the extenders through to 2015.
Great. Kathy?
Hi, everybody. Kathy Weiss with First Solar. First Solar is what we call a fully integrated solar energy company. So we manufacture the modules. We manufacture here in the U.S. as well as in Malaysia. They're a thin film technology. But we also develop large utility scale projects and do some work in the commercial and industrial space. So what most people think about solar when they hear about it is the rooftop, and that's one segment of the market. But what most people don't think about is a power plant that if you drive 3 miles one way, 4 miles the other way, and in between you've got 9 million solar panels. That's sort of the scale of utility scale projects, and we've got about 3 gigawatts either under construction or in operation today. It's a global marketplace for solar, so while the U.S. is our largest market right now, there's an enormous amount of opportunity really across the globe. What we've got at stake in the extenders package is similar to my friends here, changing an eligibility standard. So the ITC, 30% tax credit for solar energy, was put in place, and it's a temporary tax credit, so 30% through 2016. And at the time the tax credit was put in place, I don't think there was a lot of thought given to the eligibility standard, because most of these tax credits, outside of the renewables that is, are permanent. So whether it's placed in service to be eligible or beginning construction to be eligible, if it's a permanent tax credit, it doesn't make a difference. But when you're up against an expiring tax credit and you're working on projects that can take many years to complete and put in service, there's a huge difference between when you can be eligible to take that tax credit. And placed in service through 2016 right now has the effect of making that tax credit unusable for large-scale projects. But as we come closer to 2016, it also becomes unusable for all size of projects. So it's pretty critical for our industry.
Great. Scott?
My name's Scott Thigpen. I'm a senior associate with Booz Allen Hamilton. We're a large, about 25,000 person IT management and technical consulting firm, mostly with the federal government. And my group largely works with the Department of Defense. In the last few years, I've really dedicated myself to helping them understand and how to meet the large renewable energy mandates that they've received. So we do everything from the financial analysis, the technical analysis, but also a lot of the market and regulatory analysis on when, where, and how to work with the private sector to get these projects sited and get them online. So we've worked with I've worked with the Air Force. I recently worked with the Army's Energy Initiatives Task Force, and now I'm leading up a large contingent that's supporting the Navy's Renewable Energy Program Office, which was just recently stood up.
Great. Well, thank you to all of you. We're going to put the panel on pause since we've been joined by Senator Carper. And, you know, when I was thinking about your introduction and Senator Warner being here as well, I realized that you have so much in common. You know, despite being, you are, despite being from different. Well, despite being from different parties, you both have Virginia roots. You grew up in Danville, Virginia, and of course, then there's the Navy. Senator Carper completed 5 years of service as a naval flight officer, serving 3 tours of duty in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, and continued to serve in the Naval Reserve until retiring with the rank of captain in 1991 after 23 years of military service. Each of you entered civilian public service at the age of 29 and have had very long and distinguished careers. Senator Carper became Delaware's State Treasurer, served 5 terms in the House of Representatives, 2 terms as governor, and became the senior senator from Delaware when Senator Biden stepped down to become vice president. Of course, you both serve as the dean of your delegations. Both of you served on the Environment and Public Works Committee, including leading the Subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and from this perch, both of you have urged the country to address climate change. And in addition, of course, to those assignments, Senator Carper is the chairman of Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, and, of course, serves on Senate Finance. So he's been a strong advocate of clean energy technologies, particularly offshore wind, and a champion of energy efficiency, including authoring an amendment which would add waste heat to power as a qualifying technology under the ITC, something that Jen can talk to a little bit later. I think I can speak for everyone here, all clean energy advocates on the phone, on watching remotely. We have over 200 folks signed on via a webinar to say thank you. Thank you for your support, and thank you for yet another trait that you serve with that you share with Senator Warner, which is your ability to walk across the aisle and build consensus. So let's give a warm welcome to Senator Carper. He's going to. Thank you, sir.
morning. Try it again. Good morning. Good morning. All right. It's a live audience, John. Great to be with you, my friend. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Phyllis. I love serving under as a naval flight officer when Senator Warner was in an earlier leadership role in the Navy, and one of the people I most admire, loved serving with, and it's just a joy to be with you and to see you again. We need more Republicans like John Warner in the U.S. Senate. We need more Democrats, well, like me. And I understand they're working on cloning. This is a cloning procedure that not only clones us but makes us younger. So we'll be around for a while. So hopefully we can offer our bodies to that process in our minds, and we'll get this place straightened out and move the agenda that we're going to be talking about. Y'all are talking about to today. It's great to be with all of you. One of you looks really familiar. Somebody showed me a picture. Gabrielle Badkin, who's our staff director for the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee that I serve, she said, "Do you recognize the guy in this picture?" And it was on a sailing boat, the guy with a hat, baseball cap on, sunglasses, and a beard, and some little kids. And I said, "I have no idea who that is." And she said, "It's Jim Riley." So I just want you to know, this guy looks like Che Guevara or whatever. He doesn't look like this when he's out on his sailing boat. But
a Halloween
Jim,
costume.
There you go. That's Laura Haynes has guided me on energy and ag and environmental issues for a long time, and when she wasn't doing that, Jim was. So if you watch carefully as I speak, you'll see them take both of their lips will be moving, and if you'll say I always screw up, they'll go at the same time. So, but it's great to be with you. I thank Jim for his friendship and for his service, and grateful that Laura has put up with me for all these years. Rob, it's nice of you to join us as well to record all of this for posterity. I come at my job as a recovering governor. I really want to get things done. And as Phyllis suggested, I do like working across the aisle. And my parents were both Republicans. And they used to ask what went wrong with me. And I fell out of my grandfather's car when I was about 4 years old at a stoplight. And later on, when I became a Democrat, my mother always said, "We wondered if you'd sustain any lasting damage when you fell out of your grandfather's car all those years ago." And now we know what happened. But they know the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. Almost everything I've done in public life, I was state treasurer for a while and in Congress, and governor now here. Almost everything I do, I focus on how do we help people? How do we help people? And I was at a Hindu event not long ago in my state, and one of the tenets of their faith can be summed up in these few words: "In the joy of others, we find our own." Think about that. In the joy of others, we find our own. If you get a Christmas card from me this year, and you will, and some of you will as well, it will have those words. And I was also careful to give credit and not to steal those lines. But in the joy of others, we really do find our own. The greatest source of joy for me is to make sure that people can fend for themselves. They have the wherewithal, the education, the training, the assistance to prepare for jobs and find a job and keep a job and make a contribution. Some people think that it's not possible to have a strong, vibrant economy and a cleaner environment. Some people really believe that. And we heard it this week in the Senate with respect to climate change and addressing that as an issue. We hear it all the time with respect to how we develop our electricity, almost a third of which still comes from coal. And the idea that we can't clean up those emissions, whether it's CO2 or SOx or NOx or mercury, and still have a strong economy. Well, for the last 6 years, we've been cleaning up our emissions. We actually have. We're producing a lot more energy from renewable sources. We're reducing emissions of CO2. We have far more efficient cars, trucks, and vans on the roads these days. And Dianne Feinstein and I think John Warner worked on that legislation, along with Ted Stevens and a number of other people. And people said, no, if you do this, you're going to put our car business, those folks out of business. And last time I checked, they're doing pretty good. And they're making some of the best cars, trucks, and vans in the world. And also they're a lot more energy efficient. I believe to say we have to choose between clean air, clean water, and a strong economy, that's a false choice. That's a false choice. We can have both. And you only have to look at the economic recovery, which is now into its 6th year, to say, maybe we can have both. Sort of like have our cake and eat it too. Maybe we can do that. One of the things that a strong economy depends on, Senator Warner, I think probably everybody in the room knows, is businesses need certainty and predictability. They need certainty and predictability. And in too many ways, they don't have it. And one of those is with respect to our tax policy, our tax code. They also need common sense regulation. They want to have the ability to, businesses want to have, make sure that their views are presented and heard, and when they make sense, that they're acted on as well. When we have large portions of our tax code having expired almost a year ago, particularly as they pertain to clean energy, and it's not clear at all whether or not we're going to renew them, either for the balance of this year or maybe for next year. Are we going to pay for them? Are we going to offset them? That's no way to do business. That's not the way we do business in Delaware. I was on the phone last night with Dave Camp, Republican chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, a fellow from Michigan, who's a dear friend. We've been friends ever since we worked on welfare reform together, some 15 years or more ago with the Clinton administration. And I said to him on the phone last night, John, I said, David, we need more Republicans like you, not just in the House, but also in the Senate. I kept waiting for him to say, well, we could also use more Democrats like you, Tom. And finally, I guess he was. No, he actually said it. But he wants to pass an extenders package this year. And he said that's one of his high priorities. He wanted to do comprehensive tax reform. And he and Max Baucus, who was for a number of years, our chairman of our Senate Finance Committee, he and David Camp worked across the aisle. They worked for a couple of years. Their staff, they set a great example to their staff to do not just a tax extenders package, but let's do actually a comprehensive tax reform, especially on the corporate side, that would lower corporate rates. You may know our corporate rates are higher than any in the world. And the idea was to try to bring them down from 35% maybe to 25%, to bring down the rates, broaden the base, eliminate some of our tax expenditures, not the ones that you and I care about so much, maybe one or two of them. But that's the approach that they worked on. The president nominated Max to go be ambassador to China. He's over there somewhere now. David Camp is stepping down at the end of this year, not just as chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, but he's going to be stepping down from the U.S. House of Representatives. Has 3 kids to put through college, and I think that's a consideration for him. Plus, he's given plenty of his life to service. So the question is, what do we do before David leaves, and while the Democrats are still in the majority? And there's been an ongoing conversation between Ron Wyden and his staff. Ron is our chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and Orrin Hatch, who's the ranking Republican, about to become chairman of the Finance Committee, to see if they, working along with David and Sandy Levin over in the House, who's the ranking Democrat on Ways and Means, if we could somehow find a way to clear to agreement on an extenders package. The president's going to make an announcement later today, and it has nothing to do with clean energy, or have anything to do with clean air, clean water. It has to do with our immigration policy. And the president's gotten tired of waiting for the House to act on a response to the bipartisan bill that we passed, a year and a half ago, with almost 70 votes in the U.S. Senate on comprehensive immigration reform. And the Republicans have not responded. I know they're divided. Some in their party in the House would love to do something, but they're not. And so as it turns out, the president's just going to go ahead and do as much as he can by executive order. He's going to announce it tonight. Some of it makes a lot of sense. In fact, I was just briefed on it by Jay Johnson, who's the Secretary of Homeland Security, coming over here on the phone. A lot of it makes sense. And I get the president's frustration. I said to him, Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, I just don't get the timing. And we're right here in the middle of a lame duck session where we got so much that's hanging fire. Maybe we could wait instead of rather than the eve of Thanksgiving, maybe the eve of Christmas to do this sort of thing. But that ain't going to happen. And so we will see what the president has to say, I think, tonight. And then we'll see tonight, tomorrow, and the next week or so, we'll see what the response is. And my hope is our Republican friends will, I won't say turn the other cheek, but my hope is that they'll accept this better than one might expect at this very moment, and just realize that the greater good is trying to get stuff done, and not just waiting until next year, kicking the can down the road, but seeing what we can get done this year. As Jim knows, I'd love to see windmill farms off the coast of the eastern United States. I think they make a lot of sense. Make a lot of sense in terms of our economy. They make a lot of sense in terms of providing a great source of electricity. They won't happen, at least not in the volume and the amount that we would like for them to, unless we provide the tax incentives to do that. And rather than use production tax credits to inspire people to build and to run offshore wind operations, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. And what we need to do is to say, if an operation of a windmill farm has begun, commenced construction this year, then that complies, or that triggers, if you will, the 30% tax credit from the federal government. And we need to continue to do that for a few years. We're not going to do that forever, and we shouldn't do that forever. We're not going to provide tax credits for solar and other forms of renewable energy forever. And what we're seeing, as you know, is getting a lot more efficient in the way we produce electricity from these renewable sources. And eventually the tax credits go away. The thing I love about the provision that Susan Collins and I have offered, same provision that Olympia Snow and I used to offer, is after 3,000 megawatts of generating capacity has been created offshore, the tax credit goes away. And it should. The idea is to stand up the operations, to show that we can do this. You have to be pretty good at deploying the windmill farms, and then they need to sail on their own. And my belief is that they'll probably be able to do that. If they can't, then maybe we ought to think about that tax expenditure expending it someplace else. But I think it'll pay off offshore. I have some wonderful remarks here that have been prepared by Laura, and I've tried to, without actually reading them, I tried to paraphrase them a little bit. And I'm trying to think if there's anything that I've forgotten. I guess maybe this. If going back to the election for just a moment, for me there are two takeaways from the election. One of those is people want us to get something done. They really want us to work together. It's kind of a mixed message, because they say they want us to work together, and yet they with their votes they've guaranteed us divided government, Democratic president and a Republican House and Senate. And I think what it is a message that they don't trust the Republicans in the Congress, and then they reflect that we have a Democratic president, and they don't trust the Democratic administration, and as a result we have, as a check in the system of checks and balances, we have a Republican-controlled Congress. Just because we're a House divided doesn't mean we can't get something done, and people want to expect us to do that. And when Bill Clinton was president, we had the same situation. You remember that? Same situation. And we got a whole lot done. And when he stepped down as president of the United States in the beginning of 2001, just think about this. This is a nation that we had gone through in the history of our country. This is what we'd gone through. Quick summary. We took on the mightiest nation on earth, fought for our freedom, won it. We were a nation torn apart by civil war, family against family, brother against brother, and fought it out, kept the Union together. We fought and won not one but 2 world wars. We survived the Great Depression and came out of it as the strongest nation on earth. We won the Cold War. And when Bill Clinton handed it off to George W. Bush 12, 13 years ago, we were the strongest nation on earth in terms of our economy. We had the most productive workforce. We'd had 4 balanced budgets in a row. We were the mightiest force for justice on earth. We were the most admired nation on earth. And that ended up, those last 4 years of the Clinton administration, with a Republican Congress and Democratic president. And that Democratic president learned to triangulate and to work with Republicans in the Senate, the House, and they learned to work with him after they got over trying to impeach him. So they learned to work with him, and we need to come back and relearn those lessons. The American people are counting on that, and one of the best ways to ensure we showed the ability to work together is to make sure that an important part of our economy, and that is our ability to develop clean air, clean energy, and cleaner air and cleaner water, and to produce a bunch of good jobs, is laid out before us in the issues that are in this speech. And I suspect in some of the conversation going on here today. Let me just stop there. I don't know if y'all have any questions you want to ask of me, but those are some thoughts I'd just like to share with you on this day.
Senator Tobin Anderson, Edgeo Group. I work with the
Tobin.
Work with the waste heat to power industry, and so I want to thank you very much for your efforts, both at the committee level and now on extenders for trying to include waste heat to power in the investment tax credit. We really appreciate it. Laura Haynes has also done just great work here. My question is this. What words of advice and counsel do you maybe have for those of us in the clean energy arena for working with the new Republican majority in the Senate?
For me, the most effective lobbies, the folks that come to see me, some people denigrate lobbyists. I never have done that. A lobbyist, if they do the job right, and Senator Warner was that they could actually present some options and a valuable point of view. And I always, when a lobbyist comes to see me, I ask them to argue the position directly in opposition to theirs, and present their own views, but then give me the opposite view, and we'll see how, if they're intellectually honest and how persuasive they are. But the most effective lobbyists for me are really, for the most part, people from Delaware, folks that I know, folks that I trust, folks that I've been in a foxhole with, folks whose intellect I appreciate and whose fair-mindedness I appreciate. And that doesn't mean that folks don't have to be from Delaware to come and talk to me and get my attention and share their thoughts with me. But that's really helpful. We're very much involved in trying to fund a 6-year transportation plan across the country, and it involves, we don't pay for our transportation system here. We borrow money from the general fund, and we run out of money there, and then we turn around and we borrow money from China. And then when they do all kinds of bad things, like manipulate their currency and do bad things in terms of trade policy, or push around the Philippines or the Vietnamese in the South China Sea, and we say, you can't do that. You can't do that. And they say, I thought you wanted us to loan you some money. And so we don't want to be in that. We don't want to be in that. We don't want to be in that situation. So one, on our transportation legislation that we're trying to move through, a lot of the lobbying that's going to go on will be people who live in a congressional district, know a Republican or a Democratic representative personally, have known them for a long while maybe, and will reach out personally to say, you should support this. Summon some courage, do what's the right thing. So I would say that personal contact can kind of break through, and it has to be not just polite and kind of sheepish or whatever. It has to be strong and forceful, because the views that I think that are espoused here in this room, you're right. You're right on this stuff, and you don't have to be shy about it. And that doesn't mean you have to be like the people who broke into my office or pushed their way into my office earlier this week and almost shut the place down. Not once, but twice, different groups, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. You don't have to be like that. We had these 2 young women on the front desk. You'd have loved it, Jim. They were about 21 years old. Had all these demonstrators in there and crowded in around there. And these young gals, John, it was just another day at work. And held on pretty well. So that's one of the things. The other thing that I think will work well, always try to connect what we're doing to job creation and job preservation. Why is, go right head to head, go right after this argument that we can't have clean air, clean water, and so forth, and a stronger economy. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. Take it apart. Don't be shy about it. Just really take it down. So that would be my advice.
Thank you for being here, for
My
everything
pleasure.
you're doing. Bruce
Thank you.
Anderson, Wilson Solar Power.
First name?
Bruce
Hi, Bruce.
Anderson.
Solar power?
Wilson Solar Power is the name of
good.
the company. Everybody loves a level playing field. but that's always in theory. The International Energy Agency said that about half $500 billion per year subsidizes the fossil fuel and nuclear industries worldwide. If solar doesn't have the kinds of tax policies we're talking about this morning, how do you see creating a level playing field for us?
It's hard to do. I'm not going to kid you. It's hard to do. Maybe the other way to do it is to, if you can't do it on the tax policy side, to do maybe a little more in terms of supporting R&D that actually leads to greater efficiencies and greater productivity from renewables. That's just off the top of my head. That's I think you see that kind of mindset from this administration, and actually from time to time we saw it from the last administration in an enlightened point of view. One of the little-known secrets is that you caught this in the news or not. Remember Solyndra and Solyndra Fisker? And there are a number of other companies that got government-guaranteed loans in order to create clean energy businesses and jobs. And if you'd listened to the campaign rhetoric of 2012 and maybe the rhetoric since then, you'd think that program was just an utter, absolute failure. Well, it wasn't. They've actually made money off of the program. They've actually made money off the program. And just like any business portfolio, you've got some winners and you've got some losers. But that's another great message for us when pushing for these kinds of programs, just to remind people of the truth. What did Jefferson used to say? If the people know the truth, they won't make a mistake. There's a lot to be said for speaking truth to power. A lot to be said for speaking truth to power. So I would say, in this holiday season, speak truth to power, and speak the truth, and link that to job creation and job preservation, and a brighter, cleaner future for our country. Thank you all. God bless you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Well, let's get right to some questions. And please, if you all have questions, I hope you're thinking of them. I'll pose a few, and then we can take some from the remote audience and some from all of you. But let me just ask you, after hearing from Senator Carper, what do you think is going to happen with tax extenders? Do you think it's going to be, first of all, is it going to come up given kind of the immigration announcement? Is it going to be a 2-year? Is it going to be a 1-year extension? What do you think?
Why don't I jump in? I was really interested to hear a comment by Joe Scarborough on Morning Joe, which I know many of us watch, and it'll be interesting to see how right on the target he was or wasn't. His observation was that this is such a tricky issue for Republicans, is that there might be folks in the Republican Party that actually would be very happy that the president took it off the table for them, so that they don't have to deal with it before 2016. So maybe we'll get a silver lining there, and Joe turns out to be right. Because I think there are folks, as the senator mentioned, who are concerned that this issue could create tensions around finishing the business at hand. But my understanding is that the folks who are leading the negotiations, the Chairman Camps, the Orrin Hatches, really understand how important the extenders bill is to the economy. And so I guess I'm going to keep my Pollyannish hope alive that the folks who really understand how important it is to jobs and that want to get this business finished with and start next year with a new agenda, looking forward and not having to clean up unfinished work from the last 2 years, find a way to get it done and appeal to the majority of their caucuses to find the votes.
Anybody else?
In watching Congress, I think it's clear they can do more than one thing at a time. Sometimes they might take an extra week or two to handle an issue, but I think immigration could delay things slightly, but I don't think it will stop it. And I think that the case that's been made for clean energy over the last 2 years, really, since we knew this extenders package was going to expire, I think that message has been coming forward at the right time, and I still think we're going to see progress.
Anyone else, or should we move on?
Well, I'll just add one piece. I'm sort of paid not to worry about lobbying and approaching Congress, since that's not what we do. But one of the things I was looking at the other day was a map of where clean energy has had the fastest growth. There's places like North Carolina. There are states in play that years ago when we last considered this issue were not even on the map. And I think that's changed the dynamics somewhat. And I think it's made the issue potentially at least a little bit more of a cross-aisle issue where you've got places like Georgia and North Carolina that are, that's a big industry now. It's important for the state, and there's a lot of businesses in those states that are very supportive of that. So I think that'll blunt some of the criticism from the Republican side that we've traditionally seen.
On that note, I'll just jump in and say, if you look at some of these districts where they're just disproportionately benefiting from clean energy, where you've just got basically a new industry that's really fueling good positive growth in their state or in their district. The incoming majority leader probably has more solar being built in his district than any other member of Congress, and so one would hope that would make a difference too.
We just released a report earlier this week that said actually Georgia, Scott mentioned Georgia, has the fastest growing, or solar jobs have grown 225% in a year. So they have the fastest growing segment of solar jobs in the country.
Yeah, I would just say, energy is not the only part of the Expire Act. There are other things in there, but also there are other seemingly higher priority legislative actions that Congress should be focusing on, like funding the government, and are they going to do a continuing resolution? Are they going to do an omnibus bill? Are they going to take care of national defense needs? And we'll see if they get through all that stuff. They have a pretty limited time to do so. And then there's the debate that you've probably seen in the papers about do Republicans want to wait and do this when they're in charge in the majority in January, even though that could delay tax filing season. So I think it's still pretty up in the air.
Okay. So, Jim, you're looking for an extension. Jen, you're trying to lift caps and get on parity with other clean energy sources. Kathy, you're looking for commence construction. And Scott, you work with the Department of Defense, which is trying to procure these things. What happens if none of this happens? What does it mean for your industry?
Sure. What happens if we don't do the extenders?
Well, what happens if either now or in the future you don't find parity with other clean energy?
So I think it's fair to say CHP and sort of energy efficiency in general has been a little disadvantaged compared to some of the other clean energy tax credits. We have a 10% ITC versus a 30%. For solar and wind and even fuel cells, which also are a natural gas fueled technology. And the issue for us is probably the same for them. We have high upfront capital costs, which makes it difficult for customers to put down the money to put in the project, which is similar for clean energy technology. It's a bit more complicated of an approach. CHP, you're taking one fuel and producing both your power and your thermal on site. By not bringing us up to parity, it slows our growth. It slows energy efficiency deployment for businesses across the U.S. This is a money-saving, job-creating, manufacturing competitiveness supporting kind of technology, which I think does deserve parity with clean energy. In terms of the timing, now we do have an additional 2 years for CHP. Commence construction is an issue for some of the larger CHP and waste heat to power projects. Getting a credit at all for waste heat to power obviously would support growth in that industry. So I think we are very focused on what's going to happen with tax reform from a larger perspective for clean energy, inclusive of energy efficiency, because it is important to growth in our industry.
It would be a serious blow to the future of the wind industry if the PTC is not extended. There's no question that as the industry, like Jen said, it's capital intensive, it's also time intensive, and that's why the PTC is so important. It gives time to order, site, and build and put into operation wind farms. So if it is not extended, we're going to begin to see a real drop-off like we've seen in past times when the PTC has expired. We've seen as much as a 90% fall in deployment, which brings with it cuts in jobs. And so as we look at what would happen if it didn't pass, that's why we're even more energized on making sure that it does continue.
This is a basic fairness issue with the commenced construction standard. So I think if this wasn't included, it wouldn't speak well for folks on both sides of the aisle that say they don't want to pick winners and losers and that they want an all-of-the-above energy policy. Because if you can't agree on something so fundamental as fairness in the tax code, that doesn't speak well for tax reform discussions. But, for the industry, certainly the solar industry is a vibrant and growing and strong industry, and the cost structure continues to decline. So the issue is not one that you're going to blow up the industry, but you will see slower growth, and you will see efforts to time the market as well as you can. So projects that could feasibly be constructed in 2017 and 2018 could be pulled forward so that you create your own boom-bust type of market when it's completely avoidable. Right. The other thing is that you'll see jobs leave the U.S. market. Right. So there's growth that's global, as the senator pointed out, and if we're not seeing the opportunities to do large projects in the near term in the U.S., well, that capital will go to Asia, it'll go to South America, and obviously that's something we should try and avoid.
It's not good enough just to innovate and invent these technologies. We need to actually deploy them, manufacture, and export them too. Now, Scott, you're working with an institution that's trying to acquire these technologies. Correct. So what does policy uncertainty mean, I guess, both at the state and federal level for the Department of Defense's ability to...
Yeah, it's hugely disruptive to what they've done. And just for people's background, I've been doing this within the Department of Defense for 6 years now. And 6 years ago, the debate was, why are we doing this? And there was a lot of pushback from the installation level, from the people on the ground about this, because it involves the commitment of very, very significant resources and parcels of land that are sacrosanct to many of the facilities, and I'm sure Senator Warner can appreciate that, having served in leadership. This is potential impact on mission. But what I've seen out of DoD over the last 5 or 6 years is an enormous leap forward in their sophistication and the buy-in across the whole command structure around these projects. And we're just beginning to pick up momentum, and we're running into the tax issue. And the problem is now, and I've just come out of the Army environment, is there is a understandable desire to rush projects through. And that's the last way. That's the way DoD hates to plan. It's not good planning, but we have to get these projects out the door. And then it invites a lot of criticism, because did we rush it? Did we do the right analysis? So I think having that pathway, having that certainty for the next 5 or 6 years, it'll not only make the pace more predictable of the way we do projects across all the 3 services, but I think it'll give us time to take a little deeper breath, and take those extra steps. But because we can see that cliff out there, there's just a rush to get the projects out the door. And we're dealing with that in the Navy right now. They're trying to literally get 1 gigawatt worth of projects out the door and under acquisition in the next year and a half. And it's going to be extremely, extremely difficult. And my fear is that mistakes will get made because just the rush to get the projects out the door.
Well, and Scott, there's a cost element as well.
Absolutely.
So it's, if you're looking at procuring energy based on bids that can make full use of the existing tax credit, so bidding in at a cost that takes advantage of a 30% ITC versus a 10%, you're actually, if this doesn't go through, it's going to cost the military, so cost us all more money to procure that energy.
Well, and I'm glad you pointed out, because one of the other things is given the strains on the military's infrastructure budgets, their installation budgets, in many cases, they need these projects to be cost-effective in year 1, not just over the life of the project, in year 1. You get rid of the PTC and the ITC, that's not going to happen in very many cases. It's going to happen in very, very rare cases. And it's not a matter of ideology. It's not a matter of somebody arbitrarily making that decision. They don't have the money right now, and that's really important.
Just 2 other points with wind. We mentioned the global market. companies that are building wind turbines and components, these are not small things. You build them close to where you're going to deploy them. There's a reason that most of the wind blade manufacturers are in or near Iowa, for example, because you don't truck these things down I-95. But if there's not the certainty, long-term certainty, those companies are not going to build another plant in the U.S. They're going to build it in China or somewhere else. The other piece of this with wind, for example, and I think solar as well, transmission is a big part of what makes renewable energy work. And the PTC and tax policy uncertainty there can affect our ability to answer some of the transmission issues that we also have to answer.
Well, I'm going to ask the audience if you have any questions, and same thing for the remote. But while someone's waiting to raise their hand, what do you think is the answer when it comes to tax reform? Is there a technology-neutral solution? Is there a parity solution after we get past extenders? Any ideas?
I think you've seen a couple of
that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to get to
approaches for some kind of tech-neutral, performance-based measure where you're looking at the outcome versus, picking a particular technology. I think it's really difficult to structure. I haven't yet seen sort of something that would satisfy everybody, which you probably can't find. But I think that seems to me that's the way that we're headed.
Well, Senator Baucus put out a draft that was based on emissions reductions, but
totally excluded.
Right. When they put it out, they said this is difficult to figure out what to do with energy efficiency. So, Anybody else, or should we go to the audience? Jim?
No, I think on what happens, I can't answer that. I think when the new Congress and the new members on those committees come together, we all of us will be having conversations with them about what the pluses and minuses are. The approach Senator Baucus put out there had pluses and minuses. So the key is, though, that there is something that is not this 1 and 2 year extension, that we provide a long-term sense of certainty that addresses all of the sources of energy, not just one.
The other thing that I would add is I know that there's been a lot of discussion focused on how to do something that's tech neutral, although they say tech neutral just for renewables and everybody else seems to get to keep what they have. So that's one of the issues. Whatever they do, I really do hope that there's an effort not to shock the market. So you've got industries now that have figured out, grown up around how to use the tax credits that they have. And it's a challenge to monetize some of these tax credits, and it's not the most efficient way. But wherever we go, let's just make sure that there's a transition to get there, because the ITC has worked very well for the solar industry. Our finance people know how to work with it. We know how to do deals around it. So wherever we go, let's make sure that we have a good transition and doesn't shock the market.
Okay. Do we have a question? Did you have your hand up? So can you tell us your name and state your question?
Michael Copley, SNL Energy. Kathleen, you mentioned maybe something that you think solar has going for it in terms of the start construction language. Is Congress not wanting to be seen picking winners and losers? We're seeing, especially out of the House, Republicans saying, let's just leave, especially the ITC, the PTC, out of extenders. Pass the package, but just leave that out. It doesn't necessarily seem like they're worried about being perceived in that way. So maybe what conversations are you having, what are you hearing that would make you think that's something that would have traction in terms of what they're concerned about? Thanks.
So I really think it comes back to what so many folks talked about today, which is the jobs issue. So I was having a conversation in a Republican congressman's office recently, Congressman Poe, who is a strong supporter of clean energy, and trying to figure out where he is. He introduced the Master Limited Partnership bill with bipartisan support last year because he believes in a level playing field. And I learned a little bit about one of the reasons why he's been such a strong supporter for clean energy. His district used to include a port, and that port, I guess, was struggling until wind started to hit in Texas. And all of a sudden, over the course of a couple of years, the port is active again, and jobs are being created because the wind turbines are coming in through that port. So I think it should come back to where the jobs are and the contribution. And if you're looking at the payback that you get for these credits, there's been a study done, I think it's on ACOR's US Pref website, that looks at the cost of the ITC and the payback it's generated in terms of job creation. It's paid for itself. So hopefully some of these arguments can be had in a way that the facts are presented and drives to good policy with certainty for all energy sources.
Okay. We're going to go to a question from the folks who are on remotely.
I have a question for someone in the audience. What new policies can draw tighter the connection between energy production and manufacturing in the U.S., like the 48C program? So most of these tax credits are geared towards the production, but what else can we think of that'll help manufacturing this?
So we announced just last week, or maybe it was the week before now, that we're expanding production capacity at our manufacturing facility in Ohio. So we manufacture in Perrysburg, Ohio. We've got, well over 1,000 employees there, and we're going from 4 manufacturing lines to 6. And so what's driving that is demand for our product, not only in the U.S. but in global markets. Some of that new product will be shipped to emerging markets. So the tax credits are incredibly important. They've been a significant driver to growth in the industry. I've got some, data points here that I think are worth mentioning. In 2013, the solar industry installed nearly 5,000 megawatts, which was an increase of 41% over 2012. And the industry now employs 143,000 workers. When the ITC was first put in place, that number was 15,000 workers. So that's just a tremendous amount of growth. So tax policy is critical. It's been the main driver. But I think having robust markets, and that gets to things like the procurement policies that the government has put in place, but also future drivers like the 111D rules, which we haven't touched on today, but certainly could create market demand in the future.
What do you think is the impact of the carbon rules? Do you think it'll be, how significant will that be for all of your
We'll see.
industries?
We spend a good bit of time talking to our customers, and our customers are utilities. I think over the last couple of years, utilities have gotten more comfortable with solar energy. They own it. They've been able to basically kick the tires. They know it works. So there's a comfort level with owning these assets that I think are going to help drive interest in making sure that the utilities have a balanced portfolio. I mean, natural gas will certainly be a large part of what their procurement is, but I think they'll want to balance that with wind and solar and other clean energy as well.
AWEA has taken a look at the 111D, the Clean Power Plan. In fact, I was with Dan Utak yesterday in San Diego, and we had a good conversation about this. Dan is with the White House and has been one of the key players in shaping that rule. There's no question, if that goes forward, that many states are going to use a lot of wind, they're going to use a lot of solar to help meet those goals. It doesn't take us as far as we believe the industry can go, though. I think there are other provisions that obviously continued tax policy is important, and there may be other things beyond the Clean Power Plan that will draw a lot of clean energy into the market.
Of course, there's uncertainty about the power plan and a final rule and so on and so forth. And what about efficiency?
So for energy efficiency like CHP, there aren't many of the identified generating units subject to the rule that are CHP. So I think this is more of a look at how states will implement their plans and whether they'll use combined heat and power as a compliance tool, which we think it should definitely do. I just wanted to go back to the question from the web, also noting that there's a lot from the state policy perspective that we can do to build market demand and enhance deployment of these technologies. Federal tax policy helps, but state policies. We've seen the Maryland Empower program recently announced for CHP, NYSERDA's CHP acceleration program in New York, California's longstanding SCHIP program. I mean, these are all good examples of state programs that help build on what the federal tax credit starts.
Scott, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think the only thing I would say, just from looking at it from my client's points of view, is one of the things tying clean energy to manufacturing that is most disruptive is the Buy America Act, which, and again, I'm not advocating for or against it, but people still do not understand what it means and how to procure, and that creates an uncertainty in the system that is extraordinarily disruptive within the DoD environment. To try to understand, and there's a new provision in the NDAA that's going to yet again address it without really defining what it means to be substantially manufactured in the United States. And I think just clarity on those kinds of things, and also an understanding of how the impact of creating sort of a content rule does, saying it's got to be all manufactured in the United States. What kind of cost impacts does that have, and what kind of downstream implications are of those? And I haven't seen that yet, but I'm not the expert in that area. So that's one of the areas I would like to see more clarity on.
Send them to us in Ohio.
Anyone here? Right here?
Thanks. Meet Ronan from GW Solar Institute. One thing that hasn't been talked about is depreciation schedules, bonus depreciation, things like that are also up for consideration. And if you look at the major tax reform proposals, they all modify the existing regime significantly, which has pretty big impacts on the clean energy projects we're talking about. Have you guys looked at that, and is there a position of where you'd like to see the tax code?
Just very briefly, it's important. But I think when we look at that, depending on the changes they make, if there's a mind to do something that treats industries alike, I think you'll see a better effort from the broader business community to do something that makes sense. But again, some of the proposals, if you don't understand necessarily the clean energy sector, we'll have to keep our eye on it pretty closely to make sure that there's not something that disadvantages us.
Okay, question here.
Well, thank you for this panel. It's very enlightening, and it seems like we're here on a cliffhanger from the discussion. Even what the senator brought up about the fact of what happens, he brought up immigration and what happens tonight as a repercussion of how the new control in the Senate and the House react to the president's speech. If the reaction is such that this decision is rendered mute until the new Congress comes in, what are you all doing to prepare for that? Because this is very important. Obviously, a lot of businesses and organizations are hanging in the balance. What have you done right now to prepare for that eventuality?
I'm happy to start. As I said, we've always known that passing any policy through Congress is a risky effort. There's no certainty in Congress, particularly these days. Over the last year, the wind industry has been pushing forward on at least three fronts that let me mention. One, on our own. I think the wind industry itself is a very strong voice and makes a compelling case across the country, not just here in Washington, but we've been having conversations with governors and with members back in their states. We've had dozens of members come and actually climb or visit wind towers over the year. We've also here worked with a broad coalition of businesses and trade associations, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and others on a push with Congress to make them understand the provisions in the Expire Act apply not just to one of us, but to hundreds of organizations and thousands of companies. So we stand together. Yesterday, the Business Council for Sustainable Energy issued a letter to Congress, to congressional leadership, focused on the clean energy provisions in the Expire Act. That was signed by over 400 organizations. So it is a broad approach. Not like any of us really think we can stand on our own. We're in this together.
I mean, we're in the solar industry and the other trades, sort of doing all of that work. But that's what we do. I mean, my comment is, if you look at the folks in my company and all the small businesses that depend on us, we've got a supply chain that spans 38 states and spends $2 billion a year. We don't have the luxury of playing politics. We don't have the luxury of looking for the political win. So we're just keeping our head down and we're doing our job. And so there's the politics way to look at it, and then there's how, if you leave Washington, how our employees and our management team thinks about it, which is we're just going to keep our head down. We're going to keep doing what we need to do. And if politics gives us some help and certainty, that's great. But we're not depending on Congress to get our job done.
There was a question back here.
Jennifer Kiefer with the Alliance for Industrial Efficiency. And we've been very actively involved in this extenders fight. But I think it really is just kind of, one fight in an ongoing war. As soon as we complete this battle, we then have to pivot to comprehensive tax reform. And I'd be interested in your perspective as to how our technologies will be able to kind of measure up as we move forward to tax reform. I'm thinking in particular of the comments that Senator Carper made about offshore wind and how, you got 3,000 megawatts deployed and, then you should be able to stand on your own. I know for certainly for the technology that's the focus of my coalition, combined heat and power, that wouldn't do it. There's undoubtedly we still need to have some type of congressional or financial support. So I'd be interested in hearing kind of what the ask might be going forward to make sure that as we move ahead from tax extenders, that all of our technologies are able to get the supports that they need.
I'm not sure I understand her question.
What's the approach through so one of the things that we did notice with the Baucus draft is that one size does not fit all. So is there a measurement that each of your sectors could think about? I think, the Advanced Energy Economy Group had a kind of similar, you get to a certain point. Are there measurements that would work, that you would believe that would work for your industry? Or is it a matter of, keeping incentives in place for a set time, until the end of the decade, until, so what would your suggestion be to policymakers on tax reform?
Yeah.
Or do you want to think about that?
No, I think I agree with you, Jennifer. There's this industry, CHP. It's a difficult one. It takes time to implement these projects. It takes time. You feel like you have to explain what CHP is to somebody a couple of times before it really sinks in. Comprehensive tax reform that recognizes the value of CHP more broadly. So it's energy efficiency, but it's also resiliency. It's operational reliability of having that on-site power there to provide both your power needs and your thermal needs, your heating and cooling, that can help you ride through a storm and provide support to the community around you. So maybe there's a way in tax reform to recognize these additional benefits that energy efficiency provides, that CHP provides.
Okay.
Senator Carper mentioned the proposal for the offshore wind, 3,000 megawatts. I mean, that's one concept. The point is, we haven't done anything. The Congress hasn't done anything yet. So there are other concepts that could also work. And the point is to get, for offshore wind, to get the ball rolling. This year, 2015, they will be putting steel in the ocean. I think if we come back and you invite me next year, I think we'll actually be able to look at pictures of offshore wind being built off of the East Coast. So it's that first step that's so important. Maybe in some cases even more important than what the step is. It's just that there was a step. Going back, we've talked about China several times today, and we had some discussion about what is the impact of the agreement with China, and will that impact the discussions in Congress next year about energy or climate policy. I think it will, but to me the thing we should remember is this is a first step with China. For so many years people were asking, will they do anything? And now there's a voluntary agreement. People will discuss whether it's the right agreement. But the point is, there is something to start working on. So I think next year is going to be a really exciting time for the people here. We have a lot to do, but there's also huge opportunity out there.
I agree. I mean, I just think that our principle going in is let's truly be fair. And if you're going to take away provisions that help one segment of the energy society, then look at everyone in the energy society and make sure that you put rules in place, again, that don't inhibit growth but treat everybody fairly. The ITC has been incredibly successful for solar energy. There are different segments of the industry that may be more or less dependent on it. So let's do something that looks at the industry, enables it to continue to grow, isn't there forever. I agree with that. We shouldn't be saying that these things need to be in place for 100 years, even though other industries have had theirs in place for 100 years. Yeah. But let's look at things like master limited partnerships. This has been a tremendously beneficial tool for the oil and gas industry. The cost of capital is one of the things that we can look at in the solar industry to continue to make our product less expensive. And yet today, we can't finance a solar project through an MLP, but you can finance a Keystone pipeline if it gets there through an MLP. So let's make sure that we've got some fairness in the code.
So what I'm hearing from all of you is diversity, parity, these are kind of some of the principles along with maybe measuring other benefits. So, anything, Scott?
Well, I think the only thing I would add to this is it's not really a tax provision, but from a DoD perspective, there is enormous value to having distributed resources, whether they be CHP or wind or solar. But we can't value the energy security aspects of that. There's still no system out there to do that, which in some cases, depending on how you and I think it's an issue nobody wants to tackle because it's enormously complicated, but it's enormously important for us to just bear down and do it. And until we have OMB sees an approved methodology for doing that, we can't value it. And I think that would be one of the things I would hope, and it's not a tax provision, but I think I would like to see it tackled.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, or maybe two. These two gentlemen before we move to Senator Warner.
Hi, I'm Bob Bortolo. I'm an IEEE Congressional Fellow with Senator Bob Casey's office. So I did photovoltaic research at the University of Maryland, actually, before I took on this fellowship. So the question is, I have two questions, actually. One for Jim Riley. What is the number of jobs in the wind energy sector? And then the other question is, what is the hit on the budget for both the ITC and the PTC? Do any of you have those numbers?
So the wind industry jobs for the most recent year are just under 70,000. And that's a combination of manufacturers, installers, operators.
And the budget score for the eligibility standard is just a hair over $1 billion.
Okay. Our last question before we go to Senator Warner.
Bruce Anderson, Wilson Solar Power. I'd like to make 2 points. This isn't really a question, but in the early 80s, there was a very robust solar and wind industry. A lot of people in this room don't even realize that. The solar tax credits and the wind tax credits were up for renewal on December 31st, 1985. And to something Kathleen said, first of all, phasing credits out and tax policies out over time is much more favorable than just ending them and terminating them instantly. Very, very difficult. So that's a message for people here in Washington to, if it has to be all or nothing, maybe there's a way to phase them out slowly. For those watching, many of you are working for industry. And a lot of us in industry back in the early 80s watched AWEA and SEIA and others work hard to extend those tax credits. We sat on our hands. And as a result, we didn't have a wind or solar industry to speak of from 1986 until about 5 or 10 years ago. So I would just encourage those watching who are in industry, work hard to get this extended because you may not have a job.
So take Senator Carper's advice and go see your member of Congress, right?
Right.
Okay. And I think that's probably advice that Senator Warner would echo as well. But let's thank our panelists before we go to Senator Warner. Thank you so much for coming today. Great conversation.
I'm going to be very brief. I remember one time I was giving a graduation speech, and I was walking down the aisle behind the president. And, pomp and circumstance was playing, and that's like taking a drink of whiskey before breakfast. I mean, that thing really gets you going, that song. And a student jumped up and pressed a little note in my hand and said, "Please read this." So I stuck it in my pocket and got up on the dais and doing the invocation or something. I read it. And the note said, "Blessed are those who are brief, for ye shall be reinvited." I work here. I want to get back, so I'm going to be brief. Two things I can add perhaps to this very good discussion we've had this morning. One is my first election was 1960. I was down here as a prosecutor, fat, dumb, and happy. I got a call, go to the White House. I went to the White House. I thought I was in trouble. "Oh, no, we're going to hire you. We want to make you a presidential advance man." What's that? I don't even know how to spell it. And that was my introduction to public life and politics. So I've been in every one of these elections. If you would ask me what we learned most from this election, and that is uncertainty. How many of us thought that XY would win when they lost? How many thought that they would lose when they held their seats? Quite a few. Pollsters, I think, are looking for new jobs now. They were not very good in this election. So the members are going to focus now on, hey, wait a minute. First, in the immortal words of Winston Churchill, who said one time, the first obligation of every parliamentarian, pause, is to get reelected. How do I get reelected, given the uncertainty of this one? Where's the certainty? And the Republicans are going to see that. And this is a nonpartisan enforcement, but this is my view. Republicans are going to see it, okay, we asked for the Congress, public, you gave us the Congress. Now we ask you for the presidency 2 years hence, and we're going to show you what we can achieve in those 2 years to justify your support so that we can have the presidency, and then we'll show you growth and all the promises in the world beyond anything you ever expected. So it comes back, I think, to one thing that each of you dwelled on, jobs. If you can continue to show the certainty of jobs that this tax structure we've been discussing will give, I think you'll prevail and hold your position. For how long, nobody can guess, but I'm sure that you will not see a major diminution in this basic tax structure. So that is my formula. The other thing, and I asked my good friend Carper, and by the way, I wasn't just blowing smoke when I said this is a guy that has personal integrity. He really does. I know him. I work with him. When he first came to Congress, he just saluted me, Mr. Secretary, you were my boss, now you're my boss. And we hit it off, even though one Democrat, one Republican. We crossed the aisle together many times. Fine person. But what I tried to get out of him was a little stronger message about what's going on when we go to bed and how the competition out there, and each of you touched on this, can eat us alive unless we do those things here at home to keep these basic industries going. I think clean energy, and really looking at it very objectively, the public kind of like it. They're not sure what it is, but they kind of like it. Now this incredible snowstorm, I think it begins to add point by point that something's going on in this climactic condition of the whole world. And it's hit us in this snowstorm. It's hit China in a drought. It's hit China in this way. It's hit England. It's hit Europe. All these things are happening. And clean energy is clearly a major component if we wake up someday and do have a clear path that the public can understand between man-made pollution and what we have to do to correct it so as to avoid these extraordinary climactic conditions that we're seeing today. So we can't wake up 5 or 6 years from now and suddenly say, uh-oh, we've really got to go full bore on clean energy if we let it die now. So it's got to remain vibrant to be on this shelf if, in fact, and I'll predict someday, we'll be more and more dependent on clean energy sources to sustain our globe and our planet. So with that, Phyllis, I sayeth not. You're in charge. Thank you very much all for coming.
Yes, thank you.